The Uncaged Fury. Chapter 1, A Reckless Gamble. Jax Morden stared down at the endless cityscape sprawled beneath him. Skyscrapers, muted and uniform in their gray hues, stretched as far as the eye could see. Cars crawled like silent beetles along the arterial avenues. A single breath, a single step, and Jax would be a crumpled mess on the unforgiving pavement below. He wasn't afraid. Fear wasn't a luxury he allowed himself. Not in a city choked by tranquility. The element, a ubiquitous presence pumped into the air and water supply, ensured a constant state of muted calm. But for Jax, the sameness, the emotional flatline, was a suffocating prison. He craved the spark, the jolt of adrenaline that only came with pushing boundaries. Today, that boundary was the Zenith Tower, the tallest structure in Nova Prime. Jax glanced at the primitive harness strapped to his back, a far cry from the high-tech gear other daredevils used. He couldn't afford the fancy tech, not on a mechanic's salary, but ingenuity was his second nature. He'd scavenged parts from scrapyards, cobbled together a system that mimicked the safety features of real harnesses. A voice crackled in his earpiece. "Jax, you still there?" "Commander Thorne's not amused," it said. It was Kai, his only friend, the one person who understood his need for the edge. "Relax, Kai," Jax replied, his voice calm despite the pounding in his chest. "Just admiring the view. Beautiful day, wouldn't you say?" "Beautiful or suicidal, that's the question," Kai muttered. "You know the consequences of getting caught, right?" "Tranquility Center and a lifetime of staring at those bland walls," Jax acknowledged. "But think of the story, Kai. First person to freefall the Zenith Tower without a suit. Glory." A beat of silence followed. "Glory or a messy smear on the pavement," Kai said finally. "Your call, buddy. Just don't say I didn't warn you." Jax patted the makeshift harness. "Don't worry, I have a plan." He didn't. Plans were for the cautious, and that wasn't Jax. He craved the feeling of the wind whipping through his hair, the world rushing past him in a blur. He craved the brief taste of freedom before the inevitable fall. With a deep breath, Jax pushed himself off the ledge. The world tilted on its axis. The muted gray cityscape became a dizzying kaleidoscope of color as the wind screamed in his ears. For a fleeting moment, he felt truly alive. Then a sharp jolt ripped through him. The harness dug into his shoulders. The world seemed to slow. He looked down. The makeshift mechanism had activated, a parachute deploying with an unceremonious pop. Disappointment washed over him, sharp and bitter. So close. Yet as the city steadied beneath him, a sense of relief tinged the disappointment. He was alive. He hadn't been swallowed by the sterile monotony below. The ground rushed closer. He landed in a heap on a rooftop, the air whooshing out of his lungs. Before he could catch his breath, a sleek black hovercraft buzzed down, landing with a soft thud. Two figures emerged, their faces obscured by mirrored helmets. "Jax Morden," one of them said, his voice distorted by a voice modifier. Jax scrambled to his feet, adrenaline replaced by a cold dread. Tranquility Authority. He'd been caught. "You're coming with us," the other figure said, gesturing to the open hovercraft door. Jax looked down at the cityscape, vibrant and alive despite the tranquility. A flicker of rebellion ignited within him. Maybe this fall wasn't the one he planned, but something told him this was just the beginning. Chapter 2, City of Fury. The Tranquility Authority headquarters hummed with sterile efficiency. White walls gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights. The air hung heavy with a silence so profound it felt suffocating, a stark contrast to the chaotic symphony of emotions Jax craved. He sat strapped to a medical table, his makeshift harness discarded on the floor. A woman in a pristine white lab coat studied a tablet screen, her face a mask of clinical detachment. "Jax Morden," she said, her voice cool and precise. "An impressive stunt, even for a known daredevil." Jax ignored the derision in her tone. "It was just a harmless bit of fun," he replied, trying to project a nonchalant air. "Harmless?" she scoffed, her gaze flickering to a holographic display showcasing the Zenith Tower incident. "You could have died, or worse, disrupted the tranquility flow." Jax felt a flicker of irritation. Tranquility flow? It's that stuff that makes everyone act like robots. The woman's eyebrows shot up. Respectful language, Mr. Morden. Tranquility maintains social order. Without it, chaos reigns. Before Jax could retort, the door hissed open. A tall, imposing figure entered, exuding an aura of authority. He wore a black uniform adorned with the Tranquility Authority emblem. "Commander Thorne," the woman greeted him with a curt nod. "This is Jax Morden." Jax recognized him from countless public broadcasts. Commander Thorne, the iron fist of tranquility, enforcing emotional control with an unwavering hand. Thorne stared at Jax, his eyes narrowed. "You understand the severity of your actions, Mr. Morden?" "Just a little fun, Commander," Jax said, pushing back against the perceived threat. "Fun?" Thorne's voice boomed. "Fun nearly jeopardized the annual Festival of Fury, the only sanctioned outlet for emotional release." Jax raised an eyebrow. "So, once a year, you let people go crazy?" Thorne leaned closer, his voice lowering to a growl. "Don't be naive, Mr. Morden. The festival is a controlled release. Without it, the simmering tensions could erupt into full-blown riots." Jax absorbed this information. A controlled release of emotions? He hadn't known. Maybe there was more to tranquility than he initially thought. Before he could explore the thought further, Thorne gestured to the woman. "Dr. Vance, perhaps Mr. Morden's unique perspective might be useful for the upcoming festival." Dr. Vance raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something akin to amusement playing on her lips. "Unusual, but intriguing," she conceded. "Mr. Morden, you might have an opportunity to redeem yourself." Jax didn't trust the glint in her eyes, but the offer sparked a flicker of curiosity. Redeem himself? And learn more about this festival? He looked at Thorne, then back at Dr. Vance. This unexpected turn of events left him with a decision to make. Play along, or risk facing the consequences of defying the Tranquility Authority. Chapter 3, Uneasy Alliance. Jax followed Dr. Vance through sterile corridors, the rhythmic hum of ventilation shafts the only sound. The stark white walls offered no clues about the world beyond the Tranquility Authority headquarters. Finally, they reached a heavy metal door, a stark contrast to the sterile environment. Dr. Vance keyed in a code, and the door hissed open, revealing a bustling workspace. Holographic displays flickered with data streams. Technicians scurried about, their faces grim despite the Tranquility's influence. "Welcome to the Festival Operations Center," Dr. Vance announced, stepping aside for Jax to enter. Jax surveyed the room, his gaze falling on a large holographic map of Nova Prime. Sections of the city pulsed with a red glow, the intensity fluctuating erratically. "What's that?" he asked, pointing at the map. "Emotional hotspots," Dr. Vance replied. "These areas typically experience higher levels of frustration and aggression during the festival." Jax studied the map. "So the festival isn't just a party?" Dr. Vance shook her head. "It's a carefully orchestrated release valve to prevent a citywide meltdown. People need an outlet for their emotions, even the suppressed ones." Jax felt a surge of unexpected empathy. All these years, he'd seen the festival as a bizarre ritual. Now he understood the fear simmering beneath the surface, held back by the ever-present tranquility. "So where do I come in?" he asked, turning back to Dr. Vance. She gestured to a terminal displaying a video feed of a dilapidated alleyway. A group of teenagers loitered around, their faces etched with sullen anger. "These kids are part of a fringe group," Dr. Vance explained. "They call themselves the Unfettered. They believe the festival is a sham, a way for the authority to maintain control." Jax watched as one of the teenagers slammed his fist against a wall, his frustration palpable even through the muted screen. He recognized the simmering anger, the yearning for something more. It mirrored his own feelings. "You want me to infiltrate them?" he asked, skeptical of the sudden trust. "Not exactly," Dr. Vance said. "We need someone who understands these emotions, who can navigate the chaos of the festival without succumbing to it. You, Mr. Morden, with your unique perspective, could be invaluable." Jax didn't like the way she phrased it, unique perspective. But the idea of experiencing the festival firsthand, of understanding the emotional undercurrents of Nova Prime, was too tempting to resist. "All right," he conceded, meeting Dr. Vance's gaze. "But make no mistake, I'm not your puppet." A sly smile played on Dr. Vance's lips. "Of course not, Mr. Morden. We simply share a common goal, ensuring a safe and controlled festival." Jax wasn't convinced. There was something more to Dr. Vance, something she wasn't revealing. But for now, he was in. He would infiltrate this group, experience the festival, and unravel the truth about the simmering tension beneath the city's seemingly tranquil surface. Chapter 4: Echoes of Discontent. The neon glow of the underbelly of Nova Prime cast long, distorted shadows as Jax weaved through the throngs of people. Gone were the sterile whites and muted tones of the Tranquility Authority headquarters. Here, graffiti splashed across crumbling walls, pulsating music vibrated in the air, and a raw energy crackled through the crowd. He had followed Dr. Vance's instructions, locating a dingy bar frequented by the unfettered. The air hung thick with the scent of cheap liquor and simmering discontent. Jax pushed open the creaky door, the sudden burst of noise assaulting his senses. A group of teenagers huddled around a chipped table in the back, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of a flickering hologram displaying anti-tranquility propaganda. Jax approached, his steps echoing on the grime-covered floor. "You new here?" A girl with fiery red hair and a defiant glint in her eyes asked, her voice laced with suspicion. "Jax," he replied, offering a hesitant smile. "Heard this was the place to be for the real festival experience." The group exchanged wary glances. "We don't need Tranquility's sham release," a burly youth with a shaved head scoffed. "They control our emotions, our lives. The festival is just a way to keep us docile." Jax recognized the echo of his own frustrations in their words. He wasn't there to agree or disagree, but to understand. "So, what do you do?" he asked, sliding into a vacant seat at the table. "We vent," the red-headed girl said, her voice laced with a bitter humor. "We share our anger, our fear, anything the Tranquility suppresses. It's the only way to feel truly alive." Jax watched as they spoke, each sharing their personal struggles with the constant emotional suppression. A young man slammed his fist on the table, his voice choked with frustration. An older woman spoke of the loneliness that came with the inability to feel genuine joy. Their stories resonated with him. He too had yearned for a deeper connection, a release from the emotional prison of tranquility. But unlike them, he didn't see the festival as a sham. Perhaps through controlled release, they could find a balance, a way to express their emotions without succumbing to chaos. "There's got to be a better way," he said finally, his voice breaking the silence. "A way to feel without losing control." The group stared at him, their initial hostility replaced by a flicker of curiosity. "And what makes you think you know the answer?" the burly youth challenged. Jax didn't have the answer, but for the first time, he wasn't alone in his questions. He saw the potential for change in their eyes, a flicker of hope fighting against the simmering resentment. "Maybe I don't," he admitted, "but maybe, together, we can find it." A tense silence stretched, then the red-headed girl let out a short laugh. "Crazy idea, Jax," she said, "but crazier things have happened." The others murmured agreement, a spark of something akin to defiance lighting up their faces. Jax wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing. The festival was about to begin, and Nova Prime was on the cusp of a change he was now a part of. Chapter 5: Echoes of Rebellion. The air thrummed with a chaotic energy as Jax stood amidst the throngs gathered for the Festival of Fury. Gone was the muted palette of daily life. Buildings pulsed with vibrant colors, graffiti art adorned every surface, and the crowd roared with a cacophony of shouts, laughter, and even a few sobs. Jax, disguised in worn clothes and a hooded jacket, felt a surge of adrenaline course through him. This wasn't the sterile release Dr. Vance had described. This was raw, unbridled emotion, a pressure cooker about to explode. Suddenly, a deafening screech pierced the air. A massive holographic projection flickered to life above the crowd, depicting Commander Thorn. His voice boomed across the city, a forced cheer in his tone. "Citizens of Nova Prime, let us celebrate the Festival of Fury. Release your pent-up emotions in a safe and controlled manner." A collective groan rose from the crowd. Controlled? This was anything but. Jax watched as people vented their frustrations in a myriad of ways. Some screamed into the sky, others punched inflatable punching bags with a ferocity that bordered on violence. A young woman caught his eye. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched a worn photo, her grief raw and unmasked. Beside her, a group of teenagers danced with reckless abandon, their laughter echoing through the concrete canyons. The raw display of emotions overwhelmed Jax. He felt a pang of empathy for the grieving woman, a flicker of kinship with the rebellious teenagers. But beneath the surface, a darker undercurrent was bubbling. Fists flew in a brawl near a food stall. A surge of anger ripped through a man's face as he smashed a storefront window. The carefully controlled release was teetering on the edge of chaos. Panic clawed at Jax's throat. This wasn't the way. Uncontrolled rage wasn't a solution. He had to do something, but what? Then he saw them, a group of officials clad in Tranquility Authority uniforms, their faces emotionless, began herding people towards designated rage zones. These zones, metal cages filled with punching bags and other frustration outlets, felt more like animal pens than therapeutic spaces. Jax's blood ran cold. This wasn't control, it was manipulation. Dr. Vance hadn't been truthful. The festival wasn't a safety valve. It was a way to contain the simmering discontent, to channel it into harmless rage. A voice boomed from a nearby stage. A charismatic figure, his face painted with defiant symbols, stood at a microphone. Jax recognized him, the leader of the Unfettered. "Citizens of Nova Prime," the man roared, his voice amplified by speakers. "This isn't freedom. They control your emotions, even your anger. We deserve better." His words resonated with the crowd. A wave of angry shouts rose in response. Jax felt a surge of energy course through him. This wasn't the rebellion he envisioned, but it was a start. He climbed onto a nearby platform, his heart pounding in his chest. People turned towards him, their faces a mix of confusion and curiosity. "There's another way," he shouted, his voice hoarse but determined. "We can express our emotions without becoming monsters." Silence descended on the crowd. Jax took a deep breath. He didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing. Nova Prime craved change. "We can find a balance," he continued, his voice finding strength. "Together, we can build a city where emotions are not a threat, but a source of strength." His words hung in the air, a spark amidst the chaos. The crowd stared at him, a flicker of hope dawning in some eyes. It was a long shot, a gamble, but it was his chance to make a difference. The Festival of Fury raged on, but amidst the chaos, a seed of rebellion had been sown, and Jax Morden, the daredevil who craved excitement, found himself standing at the precipice of something far more significant, a fight for the emotional freedom of Nova Prime.